Hello and a warm welcome to this webinar brought to you by Third Sector in partnership with the Open University. Thank you so much for your patience and sincere apologies that we've not been able to deliver this to you live this morning. Unfortunately, our tech team has been experiencing a server issue, but we are going to push ahead. So my name is Emily Burt. I am the editor of Third Sector magazine. And today we're going to be talking about how charities can do more with less and dig into the core questions of how organisations can rethink, reprioritise and recover as the sector gradually emerges from the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm delighted to be joined by a great lineup of speakers today. Firstly, we're joined by Nikki Bell. Nikki is a freelance fundraising and marketing expert and a co-founder of the Fundraising Everywhere platform. So hi Nikki, it's great to have you with us.
Hi, thank you for having me. So yes, I'm the co-founder of Fundraising Everywhere, the virtual learning community for fundraisers everywhere, and Everywhere Plus, the online platform that keeps people connected and engaged in inclusive ways. I've worked in the charity sector now for over 10 years, both in-house and as a consultant, and I help organisations do big things with small innovation.
Thank you so much, Nikki. We're also joined today by John Brown, who is the Director of Strategic Partnerships at Barnardo's. So hi, John, please can you tell us a few words about yourself and about your role?
Hi, Emily. Yeah, nice to be here. So I'm, as you say, Director of Strategic Partnerships at Barnardo's. We have a really strong focus on systems change at Barnardo's about changing systems to improve outcomes for children and young people and families, and that's key to my role. So I lead on our three big core priority programs, focusing on improved mental health and well-being, improving services and outcomes for children in and leaving care, and also treatment and prevention of child sexual abuse and exploitation. We also run a number of national centres and a network of other strategic partnerships around the country as well. So I'm delighted to be here at today's session to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's great to be joined by Rita Chutter, who is the Chief Executive of the Small Charities Coalition. Hi, Rita, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you, and thank you for the invite today as well. Yeah, my name is Rita Chutter. I'm Chief Executive of the Small Charities Coalition, and we are the country's largest umbrella body for small charities. We have 16,000 members. We offer low cost and free training, advice and support. Anything that a small charity needs to set up, develop and manage its resources and its own progress. And that's what we're all about.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rita. And last but certainly not least, we're joined by Dr. Jacqueline Jarvis, who is the Director of the Centre for Voluntary Sector Leadership at the Open University. So hi, Carol, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, thank you again for the invite. It's great to be here. As you say, Emily, I have the privilege of directing the Centre for Voluntary Sector Leadership, which is based in the Open University's Business School. We're a group of academics who teach and research on the topics of leadership and collaboration, with a focus on the voluntary sector and really making a difference by using research insights and applying them to practice. So we do that through our mainstream teaching, but we also have a free open access learning offer, resources on our website and events. And I should just say that before I came to academia, I actually spent 20 and more years in practice in third sector organisations and public sector as well. So I have also had the experience of being there on the front line. Great to be here today.
Thank you to all of our speakers for joining us today. So we have seen incredible resourcefulness, hard work and support generosity in the charity sector over the last 18 months, in what I think it is fair to say has been one of the most disruptive periods of the voluntary sector's history. The COVID-19 pandemic ramped up some of the challenges that charities have always faced around income, staffing, demand and leadership. And simultaneously, it increased the demand for charities' frontline services, putting them under immense pressure. To weather this storm as we come back out of the pandemic, organisations are going to need to stretch their dwindling reserves even further and to become even better at making the most of the existing resources that they have. So our expert panel today are going to share their insights on this, and they're going to discuss what steps the sector can be taking now in order to come back even stronger. And so, yes, I'm going to open first by talking about kind of the biggest pressures that the not-for-profit sector is facing at the moment. So Carol, we will open with you today. Can you tell us a little bit more about these challenges, the things that you've seen in your research, and how you think charity leaders can sort of make the most of their existing resources in order to overcome these?
Yeah, thanks, Emily. So as you say, the challenges are changing, aren't they? So the stories we were hearing in our research at the early stage of the pandemic, they were very much about people adapting incredibly quickly, finding new ways to work and to keep in contact with communities and service users, and often working with others to get things done in a really urgent type of context. And we've heard great examples of collaboration, how collaboration has worked really well. We've also heard examples of how collaboration has been really difficult, and people have really struggled to get a voice for voluntary organisations and for communities and to get to the table, and have had to be quite forceful about that. And I think what people are now engaging with is what does that mean for what comes next? How do you move from that quite urgent and quick way of working and responding and doing things perhaps together without an awful lot of preparation and talking, and actually moving to a situation where you're thinking more strategically about the longer term? And they seem to be the kind of things that people are saying to us now as we come to this next stage. I've got 3 things I want to suggest that people might reflect on. And the first thing is, from our research and from what we hear from people, collaboration is really important. Working with other people and taking your resources, your limited resources, and combining them with somebody else's, finding synergy and doing something you couldn't do on your own. That's great. But actually, research tells us that collaboration is really, really difficult. And I think many of us actually know that from experience too. And so there's huge potential in collaborative working, but it's also fraught with difficulty, power dynamics. It's prone to inertia as well. And so I would really advise thinking really carefully about the potential of collaboration, but also taking time to think through the likely costs of collaboration before jumping into collaborative relationships, particularly where there are power imbalances. The second thing I'd suggest thinking about is how leadership is shared across the organisation and beyond the organisation, because people are the biggest resource that we all have. And it seems like a really important time to consider whether responsibilities can be shared and distributed, not only because that avoids burnout, but it's a much more inclusive way of working. This doesn't seem to be the time for the single heroic leadership model, but rather a time to think about sharing and distributing leadership responsibilities. And the third thing that I've heard from people, and we've seen in our own leadership learning clubs, which we've facilitated during the pandemic online, is just how important it is for people to find time out from the front line to reflect, and places to find peer support. And that seems incredibly paradoxical when there's so much pressure just to get things done and to get on with it. It's incredibly difficult, I appreciate, to find that space to step back. But I just think that's incredibly important for individuals and for organisations too. And again, it's a way of just being sure that we reflect on how things are going to work over the longer time and who needs to be involved in leading, and just give individuals as well, give ourselves space to do that. So finding a safe peer support group that you can work with, possibly through some of the organisations on the call, but many other organisations providing those kind of spaces, I think is really important at this time. Thanks, Emily.
Thanks so much, Carol. And just bouncing off what you've said there are definitely some very big issues which organisations need to be kind of thinking about now as we're thinking about this longer term recovery, some big and complex challenges that need to be overcome. Nikki, did you have some thoughts to add about this?
I did, and it weaves into something that Carol's touched on already around the leadership and inclusivity. So I think I know something that's happening from within teams as well is the issues with equity around race, sexuality, socio-economic status, education, disabilities. And that's supported by the news that we've seen coming out of Amnesty International and NCVO. And it's not just the reviewed organisations where that'll be happening in organisations right across the country and right across the world. So there is going to be some work to be done to undo that damage. And I think charities are having to learn more about how they can recover beyond the pandemic, whilst also not putting more people either internally or their beneficiaries in harm's way, and how they can do that inclusively. And then also, you know, coupled with the ongoing threat from the climate emergency, the reduced team capacity, you know, there's all this opportunity, and we might not have the team members to lead on that in a lot of cases. In the recession, there's going to be a lot more on the minds of the leaders than just, you know, strategies and collaboration. It's all of that has to be weaved in together, which I can see being a big challenge for this year and the years to come.
Thank you so much. Some really important things for consideration there. And I think kind of what you've touched on there is that, you know, leadership and thinking about how we are leading through these crises is going to be incredibly important, and having kind of strong leadership and strong skills development so that we have the right people at organizations who are steering them through these crises and out the other side is going to be incredibly important. Now, John, this is something that you have quite a lot to do with at Barnardo's. So would you like to tell us a little bit about what organisations can be doing to develop their internal talent and how you've been sort of embedding this at your charity?
Yeah, thanks, Emily. Yeah, I mean, I've got 10 areas that I'd just like to whiz through pretty quickly in 5 minutes in terms of what we've been trying to do at Barnardo's to develop our internal talent, to retain it, and to bring new talent into the organisation as well. We're not getting it all right, and we're very much learning as we go along. And the last 12 months or so in the pandemic has certainly influenced and shifted the way in which we've been doing some of our strategic thinking in relation to this. But point number one, I think, critically important to remember about getting the basics right, really, just in terms of staff care, supervision, performance development review. We've ramped up and stepped up our for example, our all staff forums and all management forums right across what is a very big organisation as well, to really try to continue and deepen that level of engagement at a time that's been very disruptive and incredibly busy. And then the use of workplace as well across the organisation as our online forum, really to enable people to engage, share great ideas. I think that's really worked well. Secondly, the development of the Barnardo's University as a really to embed us as a learning organisation. I think that's now well in place, and we've got some great plans in terms of the sharing of learning within the organisation. We found that's been a great attractor to staff within the organisation, and indeed people thinking about joining the organisation as well. And then linked to the BU, 3 core pillars of training and development. I think really trauma-informed work, the importance of taking a trauma-informed approach to obviously the work that we do with children, young people and families, but also recognising the way in which individual and collective trauma can impact on the way we all do our work. And obviously that's been brought very much to the fore during the last year or so. Secondly, anti-oppressive practice, and in particular anti-racist training that we've been really focused on over the last few months. Obviously, with the murder of George Floyd, with the rise of Black Lives Matters, and other events as well. I think that has really engaged and galvanised our thinking and people within our organisation to really take a lead on that. And then thirdly, license to recruit as well, which is really improving the way in which we develop, bring on and hire new people as well. And I think really improving the way in which we develop our recruitment and selection policies and procedures through license to recruit has been key. Point number, so those three pillars there, and then point number 6, really taking forward our working from anywhere approach, our flexible working approach. Obviously, we've all during lockdown been working remotely. We're beginning now to take a more flexible and blended approach to working, and I think that staff are really recognising the opportunities and the value that can bring in terms of being based anywhere and improving the way in which we can collectively problem solve and come together remotely, but also importantly as we hopefully begin to move on and out or into the next phase, at least, of the pandemic, have the opportunity now of meeting face to face as well. So we're taking a lot of steps in that direction in terms of really looking critically in terms of the way we work and the ways in which that can encourage people within the organisation, but also ensure that we are as much as possible an attractive organisation to engage and work with. Point number 7. Really having a really strong focus on development and innovation, I think, really has been key, linked to our imperative to be aspire to be a real learning organisation, but also taking research and development really seriously. That imperative about testing, not being afraid about we're recognising when things aren't going to work and then failing fast, and then moving on and integrating that learning into our practice and work with children and families as quickly as possible. Point number 8, agile approaches, I think, are incredibly important as well. That links to the point I was making about development and innovation, and that recognition that to engage people and to engage staff, it is really important that people feel that they've got a real buy-in, an opportunity to engage at a very early stage and in a very collective way about new ideas, new developments, and taking a very flexible and agile approach to do that. And remote working has, in its own way, enabled and facilitated that to set up relatively fast meetings right across the UK that just wouldn't be possible with face-to-face. Point number 9, freedom to innovate, I think, is incredibly important through workplace and other online forums that we've got, and through the development of our innovation communities, our communities of practice as well. I think that's been incredibly key for us. And then finally, a focus on systems change. And I said in my introductory comments really about our focus and concentration on systems change. That links into some of the points that have already been made about needing to be enabling, and the important point about interdependence as well. I think really particularly for a big organisation, a big charity like Barnardo's, the role and responsibility I think we've got in terms of systems change and engaging with other smaller voluntary sector organisations to ensure that in terms of really improving outcomes for children and families, we've got that genuinely collective approach to systems change. So those are my 10 points I wanted to make really in terms of engaging and hopefully ensuring that people who work for Barnardo's feel as though they're working for an organisation that they've got real investment in and that they want to stay with as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. A huge amount of information in a tiny amount of time there. So there was loads and loads of things to unpack, and we'll come to some of the points that you were making there a little later on in our discussion. But something I thought was very interesting that you mentioned there was innovation. That word came up a couple of times, and indeed we have seen, even though the last year has been intensely challenging for the charity sector, we have seen extraordinary innovation from the sector in this time. We've seen that agility in terms of their responses and the speed with which they've actually been able to adapt things like services and fundraising practices for socially distanced environments in order to thrive and to keep supporting the people that they work with. And something that comes up time and again at the moment is kind of looking at digital growth in the sector and the rapid digital transformation that we have seen over the last year. And as we now start to sort of re-emerge from this locked down state of living, I think there's definitely questions on people's minds at the moment about how charities can kind of build on those acute digital transformations to set them up for sort of longer term future successes. Nikki, I know that digital transformation is something that you have plenty of insights in. So would you like to tell us a little bit about sort of what you're seeing in this area at the moment?
Sure. I mean, if 2020 taught us anything, it was that it was actually possible. You know, people have been learning about digital transformation and going to all the conference and webinars, sessions about it for years. But it was great in some ways just to have that push. You know, there were no other safe spaces to revert to. There was no, well, there probably was in some cases some kind of trepidation from the board still about whether we should do that, but it was either do virtual or do nothing. And I think it has shown us so much about what is actually possible and the reaches it can give and the inclusivity that it has. And I think you're right, this year is all going to be about making sure that we don't go backwards on that. How can we adapt it further? How can we build on it? Some great examples of organisations that are doing really good things. The Stroke Association, previously they had their in-person stroke assembly, and it was in London. And a lot of the people who came to these events were stroke survivors. So as you can imagine, the crowds for that weren't very big. And during the pandemic, they adapted that to online, and they just used a really simple format. So it was just half an hour every week. They used our platform for it. They work collaboratively, like across teams, to get networks and ideas for speakers and beneficiary insight and audience insight as to what people actually wanted. And they completely smashed the targets for reach and engagement. And the feedback that they got from their supporters and their families was huge. And the most recent update that I've had from them is that they are going to keep doing that. And they're going to take what they learned last year and they're going to build on it. So make it better. So it's not about, all right, we've done digital, now we're going to keep it here. It's right, let's refine it, let's test it, let's do a little bit more, and just push yourself just out of those spaces, talk to other people and find out what they're doing and bring that into and adapt it, of course, to what works for you. I guess the key thing with digital transformation for this year is don't just copy off what another organisation is doing. You need to adapt that and tinker it for your own audience and organisation. Medical aid for Palestinians, they raised thousands of pounds within days on Instagram, because they took the tools and the audience insight that they already had, and they were able to target this campaign to a really specific audience, which had a really big positive impact for them. So they were taking something that they'd done previously, coupled that with that platform, and that just flew for them. And I saw today actually from Breast Cancer Now, I think it was the CEO who shared that on the 31st of May, they just reached the £10 million milestone for Facebook fundraising since 2017. So, all those Facebook fundraisers, all those events, and that's just a free tool that we have access to. So I think for me, innovation and digital transformation for people who might work at smaller organizations that don't have big budgets and big teams, that can seem like, oh, you have these innovation days and labs, and that sounds really timely and expensive. And it doesn't have to be that at all. It's about, right, what do we do already, which could be better, and what existing tools are already out there that we can weave into that to make it work for us. It's not about making a completely new version of it. It's just about adapting it. And there's so many organizations just further down that line, like we've seen here today, that are happy to share an update on how that works. So, and as well, just to touch on what John said, the impact that it's had for teams and people being able to work from home, and the positive impact that that's had on their lives. They can be there for the people that they love. They can spend time on their own health and well-being, and they can actually give more to their role because they're not stressed and commuting all of the time. And I think this will definitely play a big part as to what talent we can actually use to bring into our teams, and there's no limits there as well. I think the key thing for continuing with digital transformation this year is, especially for the organisations who may be watching this, is to just keep that low effort for big impact. So review what you did last year. If you haven't done anything yet, I don't know what you've been doing at this point. There's bound to be something in some capacity. So review it, go back to your audience, find out what they liked, what they didn't like, adapt on that and build on it. So if you hosted a Zoom event last year, use the Sleeker platform. If you ran a campaign and found it was successful on Facebook, adapt it, run something more targeted, try it on TikTok or Instagram, just anything like that you can tweak it, but just keep testing and reviewing that. And I can totally understand why some people might want to rush back to normal, because last year did feel quite frantic. People were pushed into these decisions and it does feel quite messy, but that's just because of the circumstance. It's not about the medium. So now that we have much more insight to work with, it can only get more structured. Make sure that you're weaving that into your other team's activities. So, yes, you might have legacies or you might have corporates, but digital obviously weaves into all of those as well. And there's improvements that we can make, but also just a reminder that normal isn't there anymore. So we do need to keep this up. Some dangers that I wanted to mention when we're thinking about digital transformation, especially moving into a hybrid world for a lot of people. It's people not treating digital with the respect it deserves. It's not something that you can just, put up on social media and it's done. Great digital will mean, having skills in your team, some budget, some testing, marketing behind it, audience insight and alignment. You can't just whack something up there and hope for the best. It does need that same care and attention as you would for something that would have worked in other methods. not making it accessible because it makes it more expensive. That's going backwards. You know, let's invest in that. There's plenty of free tools out there as well that can make these things more accessible, and it's a great thing as well for supporters and organisations to get involved in to help you. And we spoke about this before we went live actually, but another danger is forcing hybrid where it just won't possibly work. I think hybrid's a new area for this year where teams like, right, we feel like we've got digital down now, but hybrid's going to be this new weird one that we need to deal with. And hybrid, for those of you watching this that aren't familiar with it, it's mirroring the exact experience for an online audience as it is in person. So they'll get the same talks, the same engagement, the same offers, you know, as anyone that was in person. And it can be really good in some instances, you know, in meetings and people working remotely. But there's things where hybrid just doesn't work. So if you do have team members who are going back to the office and there's some working from home, forcing hybrid meetings in that situation won't actually work. And it's been proven that if one person's joining in on an online platform, then everybody needs to, regardless of where they are, even if they're in the same office. Obviously they'll be on separate laptops. So it doesn't force to work it. And what will happen if we it doesn't work to force it. And if we do that, again, you know, we'll end up blaming the medium rather than just how we're using it. So fully explore things that aren't working and see if you can tweak it and transform it again. But ultimately just keep testing and talking to your teams, talking to other organizations, the fundraisers, talk to your beneficiaries. What are they like? What do they want? And talking to your audience as well. But my plea is to not give up on the 15 months that you've spent getting to this point.
Thank you so much, Nikki. And I did see that Breast Cancer Now tweet, and something that I thought was absolutely incredible about it, that £10 million donation mark, is that 54%, so more than half of it, was raised in the last 9 months alone. So since the pandemic started, they have raised more than half of that total sum, which just goes to show, I think, that, you know, if you do something in the right way and you implement a tool in the right way and you've thought about your audience, then it doesn't have to be this really big, whizzy, expensive platform. You can use something as simple as Facebook fundraising and have incredible results. So I think what you were saying there about not just implementing digital for digital's sake, but taking care and thinking about how it's going to serve your organization, it can return the most extraordinary results. So Rita, I mean, of course, you are the Chief Executive of the Small Charities Coalition, and I think probably no organisations know better than small charities the sort of pressures of having to do more with less and having to, you know, make interventions work without huge amounts of cash at their disposal. So what, for you, what does kind of that idea of doing more with less really mean, and the organisations that you work with? And I guess as a follow-up to that, you know, we've had this collaboration piece sort of through this discussion coming up time and again. So how important do you think it is that charities are kind of collaborating and sharing their expertise to sort of get through these difficult times?
Lots of interesting points there. I think maybe if I can start off with sort of following up on where Nikki left off around digital as well. Absolutely, the kind of opportunities that's offered for small charities is very much something that we wouldn't have considered for lots of organisations a couple of years ago. And I think more than actually the delivery of services, what the more kind of focused pivot towards digital has enabled is a sense of community. And I think that's really different to where we were in the Small Charities Coalition a couple of years ago. We had lots of events. Like most national charities, we were London-centric or South-East based. But actually, being online has created a whole different sense of community where peer support, where shared learning can come much more to the fore than it ever did before as well. So I think that leads on neatly also then to the whole issue around collaboration and partnership working. My biggest fear at the moment is that small charities are facing an enormous amount of pressure from funders and from just the general talk in the sector to merge. And that's what everybody's pushing towards, seeing merger as the solution to small charities. Now, if we take it a stage back, I think that actually goes back to the fact that people don't understand, the general public and actually politicians as well, don't understand how the sector's made up, and that a large proportion, more than 90%, is actually small charities. Small charities exist on Optimism, and especially over this last year, they've totally run on hope more than anything else. And that's why you don't see small charities closing or feeling under the same pressure as some of their larger peers, because they were agile, they were quick on their feet, and they were nifty before, and they still are now as well. So they've been able to adapt in much more of an innovative way. What small charities lack at the moment is the opportunity to amplify that innovation, to amplify their new work as well. And I think we have innovations like the Social Value Act coming back to the fore. We have kind of the changes around procurement that will make it easier for smaller and larger charities in particular to collaborate. But before we get to that point, I think there needs to be a confidence moment for small charities where they actually feel empowered to be able to celebrate the work they've achieved, especially over the last year. Some of that's hindered by the fact that at the moment we're hearing from our members that lots are finding it difficult to maintain those social relationships and those human relationships that were the bedrock of their governance, or that were the basis of volunteering in their organisation. 40% of our members have said they are currently finding it difficult to recruit volunteers. Now, that seems to me very much the lifeblood of small charities and charities in general. So we've got to really kind of go back to basics to some extent in the sector to actually look at what's the bedrock of charitable work and charitable giving. And I think that possibly brings me to my last point on this issue as well, which is about the nature of charity itself. I think one of the things that COVID has shown is that charity can work in lots of different ways. And whilst we've got the structural kind of guidance of the Charity Commission there as well, that sense of social purpose, that sense of doing good has actually amplified. It's brought on board people who wouldn't traditionally have associated themselves with charities previously as well. They're the lifeblood of small charities in particular. And we've got to find a way of actually saying that there's a broader umbrella of organisations that do good other than those that are just registered with the Charity Commission. And in particular, that relates to that whole issue that a couple of speakers have alluded to before around equality and diversity. If you look at a lot of people who are currently setting up charity, which is a lot of our work at the moment, or charities and not-for-profits, a lot of them are from what is known as the protected characteristic groups, because they feel disenfranchised from the labour market and they feel not heard, not seen. So actually, charitable giving and charitable purposes become much more to the fore. Our challenge collectively as a sector is how do we get others to understand that?
Loads of food for thought there, Rita, and I think what you've just said there about people who feel kind of disenfranchised setting up their own organisations because they feel let down by other kind of structural societal kind of mechanisms is really, really interesting, and it would be fascinating to see if that trend is going to play out over the next couple of years. So plenty of food for thought from all of our panellists here. We do have a couple of pre-submitted audience questions, but before I move on to those to try and get those answered, I would love to just ask everyone for their final thoughts, which is, what is the key thing that you would each advise charity leaders to prioritise now in order to safeguard and support the future of their organisation? Nikki, I'll start with you.
My one piece, it was hard to pick one, to reassess what's working in your ongoing plans. The strategy that you had in 2019 and 2020 is not going to serve you well this year. It needs to be reviewed and adapt, and look, of course, at what's happening beyond the sector, because that's going to impact us massively in the months to come. And what's worked before is not a guarantee for this new world that we're emerging into.
Thank you so much. Rita, one piece of advice, what would that be?
Fill yourself up with optimism and hope. It's going to be very depressing. We know there's going to be tough challenges for lots of organisations, but I think that sense of can do, that sense of optimism and that sense of innovation is what all of us need to keep very much to the fore.
Thank you very much. John, what would your piece of advice be?
I think for me, it would be listen and respond to your users and your beneficiaries. Keep that dialogue open and live, and listen to your people as well, to those who work for you.
Thank you so much. And finally, Carol, do you have any advice for people who might be watching today?
As the last person to speak to this question, I think I can start by saying all of the above, everything that my colleagues who are on the panel have said. But also, I think this issue of, many of us have used the word collective, we've talked about inclusivity and so forth, and just looking at where you can share and who you can share with, and whether that's about sharing your personal support, your own journey, or looking more seriously at how tasks and responsibilities can be shared. But just taking another look and not trying to be the lone leader and the lone voice on your own, and also including those more diverse voices in that process, really important.
Thank you so much. Right, so we do have a couple of questions for the panel that have already been submitted, but if you are watching on demand and you have anything that you would like to ask, do please still submit those in the question box, and I will make sure they get back to our brilliant speakers today. But first of all, we have a question which says, we are a small not-for-profit, which is really dependent on volunteers with digital skills, and they only have limited time to give us. How can we grow our skills base in this area when we can't really afford a hotshot digital team? So I feel like this has come up in some ways earlier in the discussion, but Nikki, I will kick off with you if that's okay. Do you have anything to sort of add to the things that you were saying earlier about how they could do this?
Sure, and I'd love to hear Rita's experience as well, having worked with loads of organisations that have probably been in this area, or will have been in this area. My advice to these people would be to think about what skills you actually need, based on the plans that you have, your audience, and where they are, and the fundraising that you will do. You don't have to be amazing at everything, and I think sometimes that's the pressure. You have to be doing social media, you have to be doing analytics, you have to be doing Facebook. But if you have to start small, then that's starting somewhere. And there are actually plenty of free resources and tools available out there. So one place where I've learned is the Google Garage, and they have free certifications and guidance. And even in the sector, there's plenty of events and webinars and guidance available to be able to upskill. But start small, based on where your audience is and the plans that you have. And Rita, you will have something else to add to that as well. What's it been like for your charities?
No, I think you're absolutely right, Nikki. Start off with your strengths, build on those. And I think especially as you're focusing on volunteers as well, make sure that you invest in those that you have. Make sure that they're appreciated, they're valued, and that if you can invest in their training, make sure you are able to do that as well. But definitely, as Nikki said as well, lots of free resources out there. Be creative in what you need to use. And yeah, don't feel that pressure that you've got to be everything to everyone, because you really haven't. If it's working for you and it's working for your beneficiaries, then that's the most important thing.
Thank you so much, both. There's a big question which I would actually like to get everybody on the panel's thoughts on. So I'm just going to go around the room for this one. It's something that certainly in the last 6 months reporting on the sector, I've seen a lot in this area, but it says our biggest worry at the moment is burnout among our leaders, who are already doing a lot with very, very little. So how can we tackle that? I think for myself, I think burnout in the sector is quite a significant problem at the moment. I would be surprised if we weren't seeing lots of burnout after the year that charities have had, and particularly for those at the top, finding support in that area is proving a bit of a challenge. So, John, any advice on sort of supporting leaders who might be going through feelings of burnout?
Yeah, it's been a tough and really challenging year. I mean, some of the things that we've looked to put in place at Barnardo's have been keeping that dialogue open and listening to your leaders, listening to those reporting to you, and ensuring that that whoever you report to, you've got their ear as well. I think also putting some structures in place and some kind of rules in place as well. So something we've done at Barnardo's, for example, is in relation to sort of Friday afternoons, kind of no meetings on a Friday afternoon, to allow people to get on with stuff, complete stuff before the weekend. Being as rigorous as we can be about ensuring that as leaders we're modeling things the right way in terms of not responding at ridiculous times out of hours or kind of over the weekend and that sort of thing as well. So just that element of kind of containment, I think, is really important. And I think what we do as leaders can be really key. It can set the tone well and be quite infectious as well. So I think that way is important. And then for leaders as ourselves, just recognizing, I think, really that we need to be in this for the long term, for our organizations, for our beneficiaries, for our service users. And recognizing that if we're going at this at a pace that's not sustainable, then that's not going to be leave the best outcome for anyone, really. So I think just a sense of being aware of that, being kind to yourself and kind to your colleagues as leaders as well, and sticking to those kind of rules and agreements, I think really that mean the way in which we work is going to be sustainable in the longer term. And recognizing also, I think finally, that working remotely does not mean to say that you need to be in meetings from sort of 8:30 through to 5:30 every single day. That's not necessarily a signpost or remark of productivity. So I think those would be some of my observations and thoughts.
Thanks so much, John. Something that really interests me is, as we start to come back into offices again and we start commuting again, time that we have probably been spending over the last year just getting up, going to our computers and working, we are going to lose that time again with kind of seeing people and interacting and going for coffees and things like that. And something that I've been thinking about is like how we make sure that we we manage our expectations, so we're not expecting the same volume of work to be achieved as we come back to real life interactions as we've been expecting in this remote working environment, because it has been extraordinary circumstances, and I don't think there's any way we'll be able to achieve that same volume of output while coming back to a more, not normal, but a more face-to-face way of working. And that, I think, is a really important recognition. Carol, tackling issues around burnout, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I've thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this. I've already said that I think for many people, just finding space to reflect and to meet with peers and that being safe space, whether it's within an organisation or across organisations, we've certainly seen that, and I know other organisations have seen that and facilitated that as really, really important. But the other thing I just reflect on listening to John's very comprehensive answer is that one of the things this highlights is a somewhat different set of what you might call leadership skills, if you like, which are around noticing and listening and reflecting and sometimes being quiet. And they aren't quite the kind of leadership practices that we associate with more traditional ideas of leadership, where perhaps traditionally we've thought about, more about how you speak as a leader than how you listen. And perhaps that hasn't been the first thing, that we've thought about in terms of a leadership attribute. But I think this is a moment for us to think differently about leadership and about how all of us, we model leadership and encourage and develop leadership in other people to ensure that those kind of slightly different practices join some of the other important things that we've all thought about in terms of leadership skills for a very long time. So yeah, I think it's a moment for us to think about doing leadership differently.
Thank you so much, Carol. Rita, do you have any thoughts on this?
I'd echo a lot of what John and Carol have just said as well. I think there's also, for small charities in particular, it's about recognising burnout. If they're so used to working at a certain pace, when actually is the moment that you recognise this is too much. And I think for small charities, because they don't always have those connections and they're not able to compare themselves, there's a real danger that burnout can creep up on individuals. And we've seen that quite a lot with trustee groups as well at the moment. So I think there's got to be a space where well-being becomes a kind of a standing item on management committee meetings to actually make sure there's a regular check-in and a discussion happens around well-being of everybody in an organisation.
Yes, I think that's a very, very good point, because of, you know, we talk about leader burnout here, but this is something that will feed down through an entire organisation, whether you are, you know, full-time paid staff or volunteers, and it has to be addressed at every level of an organisation. Absolutely. Nikki, do you have any final thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think what we need is just to continue, I think, and to elevate our approach with vulnerability and acceptance. There's a lot that leaders are dealing with at the moment, which they would never have planned for, probably don't have the experience and skills for. And there's so much happening out there that not everything will get done and not everything will be perfect. I heard a great visualization of this, and I can't remember where I heard it from, so hopefully one of the viewers can remind me. But everything that's going on, it's like juggling different types of balls, and you've got the rubber ones and you've got the glass ones, and sometimes you just have to let a couple of rubber ones drop to be able to catch a glass one. And I think that's something that we're all doing at the moment, but we're feeling guilty that those rubber ones get dropped sometimes. But if we look at it from the bigger picture, it's needed, and there's other priorities out there, which in some cases will be, you know, your well-being and your mental health.
Thank you so much. So we've talked a lot about the challenges that organisations have been going through over the last year, and the plans and the sort of strategies that we need to be thinking about to take organisations on to future success. I guess for the final question, because we do just have a couple of minutes left now, I'd like to ask the panelists how optimistic they feel currently about what is going to happen next for the voluntary and not-for-profit sector, and if they have any final thoughts on what organisations need to be kind of doing to create that sort of optimistic and positive future for the sector. Rita, I'll start with you, because you spoke about hope earlier, which I thought was really, really refreshing to hear, actually.
Yeah, it's a topic very close to SCC's heart, just because of our general tone of voice and the way in which we view the world. I think that whole notion of optimism has to be very much to the fore, but I think that can only be realised if actually you have access to information and resources as well. So especially from a small charities point of view, it's about keeping yourself informed. It's about reading Third Sector magazine. It's about reading the other publications out there and making sure you're in the right networks, but at the same time, the appropriate networks, and not overburdening yourself. And I think there's a real sense there. And I think also it's one of the big kind of things I think charities need to look at the moment is also about how to keep their own voice intact. And, you know, we've been so distracted by the pandemic in the way we deliver services, in repivoting, in redesigning. What we haven't really thought about is our charitable objects in the same way. So I think it's now time to pause to think, what are the advocacy skills that we now need to actually amplify and make the change that we were originally set up to do?
Thank you so much, Rita. John, are you feeling optimistic about the future?
Certainly more half full than half empty. I think there's tremendous opportunities for charities, and you know, at the moment we shouldn't be looking to charities merging or reducing in terms of total number. They should be proliferating, they should be expanding. I mean, what we've seen is a massive expansion of need over the last period, haven't we? And that's and our insight and window into that need, I think, really has increased, and locally developed charities responding to that need is absolutely the way we need to be going. And we've certainly learned through some initiatives over the last year at Barnardo's, really the ways in which we can collaborate and work with local charities. For example, just very practically in terms of skills about bidding for funding pots and that sort of thing. Funding pots that we might not be considering as a larger organisation, as a larger charity, but can make a massive difference for a small organisation. But they haven't got the necessarily the skills or the infrastructure in terms of the that bidding experience, and we have and can work with them to get that funding in, I think, really. So I think that there are part, there are some real opportunities, I think, really for the expansion and growth and flourishing of the charitable sector. That's not to say there aren't some real challenges out there, because there are, but I certainly feel more optimistic than not as we look ahead.
Thank you so much, John. Carol, what are you looking forward to?
So I think when one of the things I've had the privilege to do is read a little bit about the history of the sector. And when you look at the history of the sector, it has always adapted. So in that sense, I'm optimistic and hopeful that this sector will adapt as it ever has done. And that doesn't mean it's not going to be incredibly tough, but in that sense, I am very hopeful for the future. I think the thing I would encourage people to do is to really enable learning within an organisation, much as Rita has described, really, that going on learning, whatever that means for your organisation, it's going to mean something really different for a small 2 or 3 person organisation from a big one like Barnardo's. But in whatever your organisational context is, aspire to be a learning organisation, and that way the learning journey and the adaptability goes on and on. So yeah, I'm hopeful.
Thank you so much. And finally, Nikki, I will leave our audience with your thoughts today. What are you optimistic about?
I was going to answer the question around the optimism, and I completely agree with what Carol has just said. You know, everything that we've went through and where we've got to now, like, we'll smash it. Like, look at everything that we've achieved. And if we keep fighting for what's right, pushing for change, asking for what we want, collaborating like this and networking, like, there's nothing that can stop us, not even a pandemic. You know, there's so much more of our abilities out there, and we've just got to believe in ourselves to push through. And what I'm looking forward to is just seeing how charity organizations thrive beyond the pandemic, because I know 100% that they will get there.
Yeah, it's such a fantastic note to end on today. Thank you so much. I'm afraid that is all we have time for today, but I really hope that you have found this discussion useful. We will be including a link to find out more about the Open University's Centre for Voluntary Sector Leadership in the show notes, so keep an eye out for that. But all I can say now is an enormous thank you to our speakers, Nikki, John, Rita and Carol, for taking part. And to everybody who has tuned in to watch this, we really appreciate you joining us. So thank you once more to all of our panelists, and to everybody who is watching. Please enjoy the rest of your day.